Okay, we're going to talk about mastery. The mastery, the pillar number 2 of success, of life and career success. These are going to be stories about my second son, Dan. And the reason why I'm doing these is because I'm saying to myself, you know what? With these videos and YouTube and all that, this is great. This is great to pass on to not only my kids, my grandkids, and future generations about Papa Rock. I want to give you the stories about Dan, what a special kid he was. As a parent, I feel like I mastered being a good dad. And I couldn't have been a good dad without good kids. I'm going to give you a few examples. I asked him, I says, listen, because everybody's busy. They have children of their own and marriages and relationships and careers, and everybody's got a life, man. I asked him, hey, what lessons have you learned from me that you're going to carry on? Dan texted them to me, so I wrote them here, so I'm going to mention them to you. And actually, they were kind of surprising. I thought maybe, he'd send one or two or something like that, but he was pretty articulate and he communicated them to me. And number 1 was education. Dad, you always pushed education. And he called it human capital. It's your greatest asset. I'm like, wow, man, this guy's talking kind of sophisticated. He must be educated. But let me tell you about education and Dan. He was always a good student, and he was an even better athlete, okay? And he had an older brother, Luke, and they're only 2 years apart, but they were like inseparable. And they respected each other. That's what I love about the two boys. They're very close, and they love the same things. They love sports. They love business. They're smart. They're great friends and teammates. They did all the right things, man. And I was so happy with that, that they were so close. And then Laura came. I think there's 5 years difference or something like that from Luke and Laura. Dan might be 3 or 4 years older than Laura. I got to give you that story because as I was divorced, I got very involved with their coaching because that was all part of the opportunity to coach so I could be with the kids. I was a single divorced male trying to make a living, raising kids, having alimony payments, live in the state of Minnesota. My role model is I'm going to be involved with my kids. So I coached hockey, softball, baseball, soccer when they got younger, brought them to the golf course, got them golfing at an early age. Their mother got them into music and dancing. These guys actually danced, and I was all for it because it was good for their footwork, for sports. They did well, and musically inclined. They're very talented. They're kind of what I would call well-rounded. Going back to Dan, here's a story that I didn't really realize didn't resonate with me until I went to Danny's 9th grade teacher's conference. And there was this teacher named Don there. First year, Danny was freshman, 9th grade, at a hockey school. It was a big-time hockey school in South St. Paul, Minnesota. So you had to go into the gym, and it was a huge collection of teachers and what we call teacher conferences, almost like an assembly line. So you had to set up a time to meet. So this is a first-time teacher, first year. Sat down with him. His name was Don. And I realized he was the baseball coach, the varsity first-year teacher, first-year baseball coach for the varsity. He says, we talked a little bit about school, and Dan's a good kid and, good conduct, respectful, does his homework and so on. As he whispered to me, he says, you know what, though? Dan is a Division I prospect as a catcher. He's a hell of a catcher. I see the talent. And Don, he said he's going to make the varsity team in 9th grade. And that's when I realized, oh my God, this guy's got talent. So what's the first thing I do? I'm thinking hockey. He's got hockey skills too, but baseball was his love. And Don recommended that Dan get some special coaching from a professional coach, baseball catcher coach. This is back when they had VHS and all that. They would do your video and stuff. So I called Gary. Gary does a recommendation, went out to the University of Minnesota, and they filmed him, and everything was blocking, footwork, arm, and they put it all on video. Put it all on video. Back in those days, I thought, wow, that's kind of cool. And big time. So after that, they said you keep these videos and you send them to colleges with pitches, saying, hey, this kid's got talent. He goes to this school. Here's his stats. Here's his video. This is how he moves, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I'm like, holy cow. Pretty impressive, man. And of course, I was living through Dan. And Luke was 2 years older. Dan was playing with his guys because Luke didn't play baseball. He played tennis, and he was similar. Didn't realize he loved tennis. Guess what I do? I get a coach. So I've learned over the years that when you specialize in something and you got talent, especially when you're younger, try to get somebody to help these kids, because I'm not a pro catcher, ball player. I was terrible. I was cut my sophomore year. As a catcher, by the way. You could imagine how happy I was with Dan as a catcher. Catchers are dudes, man. That was the start of 9th grade, 10th grade, and so on. And of course, Dan was all state and got all these conferences. The thing about Dan was he wasn't a screamer as a catcher. He played by example. He was a role model. And the pitchers, he loved calling his pitches. By the way, this kid's calling his own pitches. Usually it was the coaches. Dan had the ability to understand the pitcher's talent, and he gave them confidence to be better pitchers. And they had good teams. They went, what do you call it, American Legion. They went to the Midwest, saw Dan hitting home runs, and they had all good athletes. These kids were so respectful. No trouble, no drinking, none of that. The coaches watched them, and this is back in the 90s. So I couldn't be more proud. Thank God I had a sales position where I could schedule my work around ball games. I would meet the parents, and a lot of the guys were also in sales and so on, so it was a lot of fun meeting the parents and watching their kids grow. I've seen Dan go from, grade school all the way through college with some of the same athletes. I was big on Dan on hockey because South St. Paul's a big hockey school, state tournament, all this other stuff. Dan was a real hard worker. He wasn't a flashy, high-scoring guy. He was more of a hard-working, in the trenches. He had a couple line mates that were dudes, and they all had chemistry, and they had good teams. Their head coach eventually became a college coach, and he did very well, but he was coached by good coaches. When he became a senior, he was in all IB. I gave him incentives. If they achieved this, they get so many dollars for their college and so on. So I more or less created scholarships for my kids all the way through high school, because I wanted them to stay on the course. You got to get grades. You got to get grades. You got to get good ACT. You got to get this. You got to get that. besides your athletic ability. So it came time to pick out a school. So I took Dan with me. Dan took me with him to look at Bradley, University of Minnesota, Northwestern, I believe Iowa, Division III schools, St. Thomas, national champion, St. Olaf. People were coming around him his junior year. I felt like I was going to be Dan's agent. I know you're laughing, but that's how I felt. I was so proud of him. And I wanted to be that guy to say, that's my son, you know? Not only his athletic ability, it was the way he treated people and the people that love him. His own brother would tell me that. His brother would show up at the games knowing that he didn't have that same skill set, but all the guys that were older than Dan loved Dan and Luke. And Luke would support his brother. No resentment, no bitterness, no jealousy, nothing. I thought that was so cool because I was brought up with 7 brothers and 3 sisters, and everything was a competition. Everything. And there was no support. It was, you're on your own to be a winner. So I love that the 3 kids got it really along. So Dan's looking at all these schools. He's got all these Letterman jackets and all this. Air Force was after Dan, and I knew some friends at Air Force Academy in Colorado. To go back, when my kids were young, very young, when I was married, we took an RV around on vacation and so on. We would stop at schools like Air Force and Notre Dame and all these big schools. And I would say, listen, someday you might be able to go to these schools, but you got to work. You got to work. But I also brought them to Boys Town in Red Wing, Minnesota when they were bad. And said, listen, this is where you're going to end up. Because I could give out a threat too, like my dad. Dan decides that he'll look at Air Force only because I asked him to. So we got a letter of acceptance, and we went down to see the counselor at the high school. His name is Mr. Funk, F-U-N-K. We went in there as a counselor, and he already got the letter from Air Force saying, hey, we'd like to see Dan come in and play hockey. Boot camp starts in July, and it was like June. I'm like all pumped up, like I want to go to Air Force. Full ride? Oh, to Air Force? Play hockey? We walk out of the office, and I says, Dan, what do you think? He goes, Dad, I'm not going to Air Force. I says, why not? He says, I'm not going to boot camp. I'm not going there. I'm going to St. Olaf. And I went, wow. No scholarship to St. Olaf. But his mother helped him with applications, admissions. Dan got a few small scholarships from community places. And then he got work to do for baseball. The reason why he went to St. Olaf, they started coming to his games in South St. Paul when he was a junior. And they were saying, we want this kid. I didn't even know who St. Olaf was, except that I played hockey at St. Mary's in Winona. And that's my first collegiate goal was against St. Olaf. Anyway, Dan picked St. Olaf. Why? He loved the coaches. He loved the campus. He loved the school. He was there for academics and good baseball, not hockey. And because baseball was basically year-round at St. Olaf. And they were, ranked nationally. But here's the big thing. As a freshman, he was DH in the first game. Second game, he started as a freshman. And he called his own pitches. That's right. And some of these pitchers were drafted by the major leagues when they were seniors, and Dan was a freshman. And they all loved Dan. Now I want to fast forward to what Dan decided to do with his life. By the way, Luke was already 2 years ahead of him in school. Dan was a freshman when Luke was a junior. And they're very close. Luke went to Wisconsin. He's a Badger. And these guys started, relationships with women. And these guys were falling in love. I'm like, oh, wow, man. What about school? What about sports? But you know what? Not drinking, not partying. And by the way, I didn't even want to know. To be honest with you, as a father, I didn't want to know what was going on. In the meantime, I'm watching Laura, and girls are a lot harder, difficult than boys. Because I'm a male. We weren't what you call entitled. That didn't go. We were built on merit. You earn it, you deserve it. And there was tough love and all that. But what I really like about Dan is what he's become. And I get emotional. I know I'm on video. I don't edit this out. I'm just proud of him. He did everything he said he was going to do. And he worked hard. Nothing was given to Dan. He's also a CFA. A CFA is like a PhD in finance. And that's a 3-year gig. It's beyond an MBA. And very few people become chartered financial analysts. Dan is first class. And now that he's in his 40s, Luke tells me when they go to the golf tournaments and the fundraisers and so on, they go together. Luke always tells me how great Dan is, but not only how great he is as an athlete under pressure, it's the relationship and the respect he's got from his teammates. Because he was a leader. And now, he's got 2 sons with his wife, Erin. We got Miles. Miles is a dude. Very smart kid, too. He's 7 at this point. And there's Nolan. And everybody says when Danny announced the name of Nolan, they kept the name quiet until after he was born. Nolan. Well, guess who Nolan? Everybody thought. Nolan. Ryan, the pitcher. Dan swears it's not. He loved Nolan Ryan. But as a catcher, when he was in high school, it was Piazza. After Piazza, when he got into college, it was Pudge Rodriguez. Yeah. You know why? Because Dan built like him, threw like him, defense like him, hit like him, with power, led like him, stole bases. Unbelievable stats. And I'll tell you, you see how I get emotional? I would cry at the end of the season if they lost, when they would lose. They never went to national championship, but they went to regions. And what else? I cried at when he graduated, of course. Senior day is tough, man. Tough to see your kids grow up. So anyway, Dan is a master at bringing up kids. He's mastered his career. He's mastered his parenting. And he's a guy that really supports people. He's got my mother's heart. Very sensitive. He's got my hair. So to finalize it, because it's still going on, and I do these videos for my grandkids, and when I'm gone, they could talk about Uncle Dan. I love that. I always call Danny Danny. Oh, his middle name is Rock. My first name, Rock. I'm named after a great Uncle Rocco. It's Daniel Rock. And guess what they called him in college? Baseball. They called him Rock. You think I love that? Oh, yeah. So let me finish up with this. Now I'm boasting and I'm bragging. And I'm trying to keep it all on Dan because I got Luke's and I got Laura's coming. But this is about the mastery. And this is my love for my kids, and this is what I want to leave them. So when I'm gone, they go, yeah, Dad was a piece of work. Dan ends up, he was being told he was going to be drafted by Kansas City or Cincinnati, I believe it was. The major league drafting wasn't a big deal like it is today. Dan just heard that this agent was after Dan, and say, hey, be patient, you'll be drafted, and then you'll make a decision. Well, here he wasn't drafted. They only had like a 1 or 2 day draft back in those days. 2000, right around 2000. Okay, Dan graduated 2002, something like that. So anyway, he wasn't drafted. And it was like, oh my God, Dan, what are you going to do? Here, the very next day, he got a call by the Independent League. In the Independent League, he had 2 choices, Fort Worth or Winnipeg. And at that time, Independent League had playoffs. You could make the playoffs half season and then the final season. And they were already into the half because he already played his high school career. So he had to go up to Winnipeg. He selected Winnipeg. He went up to the Gold Eyes. When was it? Probably June. He played out the year and he went to the playoffs. And he played a little bit. And I asked him, what the difference was. And he told me pretty much the same, except that you got wooden bats and everything's faster. Curve balls are faster, fastballs are faster, and so on. And catching, you better be ready. A lot of stuff in the dirt. So that was pretty cool. I asked Dan, what was it like being on the bench watching these guys? And, Pete Rose's son was there, Pete Rose Jr., and some, minor league players that were, or major league that were sent back to the Independent League. So Dan was one of the younger ones, and he just said, Dad, he goes, I don't know about a future because, this is a long haul, and if you get hurt, you're really screwed. Dan had his mind on finance. He knew he was looking at as we mentioned, his goals, his future, his finances. Get your head together, get your house in order before you're 40, etc. He was asked to come back the next year after success, and they were in the World Series. They lost the World Series that year. Winnipeg did. But he got to travel and get some experience, and he said his first base and hitting instructor took him under his wing, so he learned a lot how to use the wooden bat. He goes, Dad, if I would have known this in college, I would have tripled my bombs. I'm like, oh. But I think he still got the doubles record in college because he was raked on the gap. He was a strong gap hitter. But anyway, he finished up. He didn't go back. He asked for more money and so on. And he says, Dad, it's not worth it. We decided to get into finance. And my dad still talks about, God, Dan should have went to major leagues. Dan says, no, it's not that way, Dad. It's really hard to do what you want to do. You know what? He made the right decision. Soon after that, after Miles was born, he was elected to the Hall of Fame. Now, who's more happier about the Hall of Fame than a dad? I got his speech. He mentioned me in the speech, of course, and his mother, and his brother, and his Grandma Dee, and so on. I mean, Dan had a lot of support. And a lot of his buddies became Hall of Fame same year, that same class. It was like unbelievable. Some dual sports. So anyway, Dan gets Hall of Fame, and he gets up there and he says, I don't know who had more fun, me or my dad, because I would travel with him, go to Texas, go to Florida with him, whatever. You know, I wouldn't miss a game. I love these boys. Not only my son, they were all my sons. And the coaches were awesome. And the elderly coaches that would come along, they all loved Dan. And now they're in golf tournaments and so on. I remind my brothers that I'm a Hall of Fame dad. That's right. Through my kids. I'm a Hall of Fame dad. At the end of the day, I can't be more proud of my kids. And they're passing that on to their kids. They have a lot more patience than I did. I just have a different personality. Dan is very patient with his boys. He's going to be not only a great dad, he's going to be a great coach. Because I keep mentioning to Dan, you got to coach these guys. You'd be a great coach. So that's my story about mastery of parenting of my second son, Daniel Rock. Not only my legacy, I'm passing it on, and I love watching theirs. I can't say enough. When I see these kids, because that's what I still think about, is Miles looks just like Dan. And Nolan has got that competitive spirit like Papa Rock. I can't believe it. The intelligence of these kids are off the charts. I love it. And not only are they getting a great education, they're getting great experiences because they see how experiences help the development of these young kids. I'm very proud. So anyway, that's my story. It's lengthy, but I hope you enjoyed it. And did I have trouble with these boys? Not Dan. Not Dan. Dan was all right, man. But Dan's very wise. And he's very frugal and prudent when it comes down to investment. He's a very sharp guy. Very sharp guy. And these guys really realize that you got to save for a rainy day. Anyway, they've brought joy to my life, and I hope I could bring joy to your life. I'll check out for now. I'll talk to you soon. Rock LaManna, always bring joy. Talk to you soon.